How I start my day is probably different from uh, many people. I'm just profoundly lazy, and I think Daniel Defoe once described Nell Gwyn as the horizontal woman, and I think I really am an incarnation. I really am a horizontal woman. I just love my bed, and it's also a very, very special bed because about 15 years ago I had profoundly painful back problems and I couldn't walk for a whole year. But I'd met this lovely man, Francis, who is my partner, and he had a special bed made for me and shipped up to Scotland. It's a gigantic organic cotton sprung bed. And he just said, this is going to help you, this is going to help you. And I realised that I'd been working very, very hard for a very long time, doing just a bit too much. I had a lot of financial pressure on me because I was a single parent with 3 children and I worked full-time in a stressful job, and I also had a huge amount of energy to expend on socialising and networking within the community. And then one day it just all stopped because I was in so much pain I couldn't move. So I spent about a year lying on this bed like a queen, actually. and actually something really big came out of it because I had lots of visitors who would come and tell me all their woes. And I used to think, you can walk and you're not in pain. Like, what is the problem here? But I did listen, and one of the problems that I heard from somebody was that she was very upset because a spiritual teacher called Thomas Hubel was going to come and teach her, but for some reason all the invitations and the preparations were falling apart, so it wasn't going to happen, and she was very disappointed. And I thought, well, I can do that. I can invite this person and I can organise that. And she said, how can you do it? I said, well, I'm lying in bed. I've got nothing to do all day. I've got a phone. I've got a computer. It can happen. And so I was resurrected as a workshop organiser in that time. And then Thomas Hubel did come to Findhorn, and it was a very successful series of events. So I think that this business of just being really lazy in the morning and just not wanting to get up, I can stay in bed forever. I can sleep for 10 hours. I am the queen of sleep. And I think that it's a relevant point because I think during this lockdown period, a lot of people realised they'd been on a hamster wheel for a very long time, and then to stop was quite a huge experience, because when you stop making yourself busy with all the things that you think you need to do, when all that stops, then there's this empty space, and then something else can come through that's different, but possibly more meaningful than the little trap that I'd got into before. In the first lockdown, because again, I had been quite busy in the sense that I had engagements internationally. I was on a Pacific tour last year in January 2020. I was visiting Hawaii and helping to run a women's leadership workshop, and then I'd gone to New Zealand and I was looking at helping Eco-Village Network, and then I'd gone to Australia. I was running Miracle Choice workshops. It doesn't sound very, very onerous. It was delightful. I really enjoyed travelling and meeting people and bringing whatever I could spontaneously to these events. But actually I hadn't wanted to go on the trip at all. I'd really wanted to just stay at home. In January I was just having such a lovely time being at Findhorn and reconnecting with the community and the events that I thought, I don't want to go anywhere at all. What a bummer, I've got to go to Hawaii. I mean, nobody had any sympathy for me whatsoever. Nobody understood. I was a bit resentful when I got on the plane and we got to Hawaii, and it rained the whole time, but I didn't mind because I'd met these absolutely incredible people. I did know I was in the right place at the right time with the right people. But you see, fundamentally, I just want to lie in bed all day. It's still the same old story. So when I did get back, and I can tell you, it was like, oh, got to get home.
Yeah.
And we managed, very luckily, to get one of the last direct flights from Australia back to London. And then I came back home to my house in Forest, which I absolutely love. And I just thought, oh, I'm home. This is so fabulous. I'm never going to go anywhere else ever again. I just want to be here and luxuriate in the wonderful bed. So I feel like a beautiful flower on the inside. You know, I feel, when I look inside, I feel as if I've got paradise and Eden and beautiful gardens and a lovely world inside me, because that's the world I'm living in. But before, I didn't feel like that. I felt shockingly bad and had very, very low self-esteem. And there was one thing that really, really helped me a lot when I was at my lowest ebb. And I was in a bookshop in Manila in the Philippines, and just, you know, sometimes it happens, a book kind of fell off the shelf, and I opened it up, and it was a book of short writings by Thich Nhat Hanh, and it was called The Lotus, and this line just said, "The lotus needs mud to grow." And I thought, wow, I'm in the mud. And then not so long later, I was in a meditation space, and I thought, I really need help. I really need help here. And I think I'd forgotten this original line. But so I went into this meditation, and I was really looking for something that would help me. And I saw visually that I was in mud. I thought, oh, great, mud. And I thought, okay, I'm here now, I'll stick with it. So I sort of stayed with this visualization of mud for rather a long time, quite frankly. I thought, how long? Anyway, after a while, I began to realize it wasn't just mud. They were like little creepers or sort of tentacles, and they weren't terribly gorgeous, but at least they weren't mud. So I thought, okay, I'll stick with this a bit longer. And then gradually I started this sense of going upwards, and I could feel that there was a root, like a really solid main root. And again, it was still really muddy. I'm telling you this because it was a long period of time. And then after a while, the mud started to clear, and I realized I was in water. And then it was very clear water, and then it suddenly started rapidly going out, like pop. You know, I was this lotus, which was an amazing feeling. And, I was surrounded by light, and it just felt really joyful and fabulous. But the most exciting thing of all was, as I looked around, I could see other lotuses. And I was in a pond full of lotuses, and it was so exciting. It felt to me this was a message that one day I would get to meet people that had been through a similar experience and had come out of it into a sort of illumination. Of course, that's exactly what happened. Yeah. And one of the things that I have noticed that's happened in my life is the things that I've imagined or seen in a dream or in a meditation, they've actually come true. And when that happens, I'm sure it happens to other people too, but I'm just absolutely astonished. So I was in Toulouse quite a while ago, and I had this really strange feeling that I'd been there before in another life, and it felt as if I was being taken by the wind around the city and seeing places that I'd been to before, in particular the cathedral in Toulouse, which is this really beautiful rose pink marble. And again, I felt this wind. It probably was windy, maybe it was Le Mistral, but this wind was just propelling me through the city. And then it took me to a park, a beautiful park, and I was pushed and pulled down these paths up a hill, and then I looked down in front of me on the hill, and there was this lotus pond, the actual lotus pond that I'd seen in my meditation. But what was really astonishing is that there was a statue of a Buddha, cross-legged, a largish statue. I think it was something to do with Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know if it was or it wasn't, but I just felt this energy of this male-looking presence that was sending out an energy that supported all of these lotuses to pop, And you mentioned that what I described had a very feminine energy, but I think it's really important to note that it had a masculine energy supporting it in a very compassionate, non-judgmental, non-invasive way. It was just an energy that was holding. It was a holding energy. And that is actually the kind of relationship that I have with my partner, Francis. He who brought the beautiful bed, he's never been involved in my life in a social way. A lot of people would be surprised, in fact, to know that I have a partner because he's kind of invisible. But he does this magical thing, which is to give me a very solid, supportive holding space. He's a Taurian. He loves to serve me beautiful food and to hold a space in the house that's just harmonious and very, very loving. And we just have a really lovely relationship. But the relationship is one where he holds the space that allows me as a kind of butterfly to safely, or to feel safe as I trip around the world doing these, tiny, tiny little things that I do all over the joint. And then I come back to him, and then I'm kind of held, as it were, in the, I don't know how to put it. It's like a phone returning to its dock. Yes, that's right. Yeah, and then I get re-energized, and then I can be mobile again. So there's a lovely balance. I never feel as if I've run out of energy. I can expend a huge amount of energy effortlessly because I always go back into this kind of docking station, which is this very unusual but very nourishing relationship. Yeah. And also the fact is that I met Francis in such a magical way. Not everybody gets a voice in the middle of the night telling them to go to Greece, but there's no other way we would have met. But I'll tell you another sort of funny story, because when we did meet, I thought, wow, he's such an unusual person. Could this really be the relationship for me? I need a sign. So we were going on a boating trip that day, and I thought, okay, I wouldn't recommend this to everybody, by the way. This is just what I happened to come up with that day. It just emerged. I thought, if we see any dolphins, then this is the right relationship for me. So we went out on this boating trip, and I got a migraine from the sun, so I felt terrible. And I always get seasick, so I felt even worse. So I was kind of lying there with my head cradled in Francis's lap, and he was stroking my hair, and I thought, oh my God, I feel awful. And then the boat stopped, and we were sort of, like this, which made me feel really bad. I thought, what now? What on earth is going on? And then the captain's voice came out on the tannoy. He said, ladies and gentlemen, I have to apologise. This is unprecedented. It's never happened before. I'm afraid we cannot go in any direction because we are completely surrounded by dolphins on all sides.
Wow.
Which is wildly romantic.
Yeah,
So that's
amazing.
A lovely story. The one thing I'm super proud of in my own life is my 3 children. They are just lovely, lovely people. I hardly ever see them, by the way. They're up and running. They're leading their own lives. But in the time that we lived together, we had a lot of fun. And I think what I always said to them was, you can do anything you like. I completely trust you. You have my trust until the moment when you break it, and then you lose everything. And that was the sort of rule by which we lived. And it was actually quite brilliant, because if they did something like break a lamp or something, all 3 of them would come rushing down the stairs. We broke a lamp. Fine, it's done. So it was a kind of a drama-free household in many respects. And I do think that I was lucky. I had these particular children, without question. I gave birth to 3 kids who then gave birth to themselves. They really were able to love each other and figure things out for themselves. And also I gave them an opportunity where I said to them, I trust you. You can figure this out for yourself. And they knew that I really meant it. I was hands off unless I absolutely had to intervene. And I think that this has really worked for us as a family. The fact that I really, really trust them and still continue to trust them. I think they know that I've got their support, but I'm very unlikely to interfere. Yeah. A challenge that I had over the years was the street where I live is a rather funky little lane behind a Chinese restaurant. And I found the house on the internet when I was living in Manila. I didn't care where it was or what it was. I just needed a home, and it just turned up. It was 2003, and it was £50,000. And through buying and selling a house my husband and I had £50,000. It was just exactly the right amount of money. In actual fact, we didn't get it. The deal slipped through, and I went into meditation. I really wanted that house because I wanted to come and live in Scotland, and I wanted my children to be in a place where the air was transparent and water was plentiful and clean and all of those things. That's what I wanted. So not getting that house represented the loss of a dream. So I thought, okay, I'm going to meditate on this. And then I did. And what I saw was the landscape where I was living in the Philippines. There was a particular limestone cliffs and white beaches and palm trees. And on the white beach, I could see the words, "Be here now." And I thought, okay, that's what I have to do. I just have to be here now. So in being there, I thought about the stresses that I was living under, and then I wrote a book. So the book was called Meditations for Mad Moments, and it was called A Stress Book for City Dwellers, and it led to quite a bit of success and publicity and so forth. And I was invited to be the executive director of a holistic centre. So, you know, it looked like I had my life on track, but I didn't. It's not what I wanted at all. I knew what I wanted. I wanted to come and live in this area here. And so when I was tidying up all the emails after the book, I saw the email from the estate agent in Forest. So I wrote back and I wrote, if anything else turns up like that house, will you let me know? And they immediately wrote back and said, strangely enough, the deal fell through. Somebody else was going to get it, and they'd fallen through, and it was available again, so I could have it. Well, you see, if I'd got the house first time round, I wouldn't have written the book. But anyway, I did come to the house, and it was, I bought it sight unseen, and I thought, well, perhaps if I'd seen it, I might not have bought it. It was a bit of a ruin, and what was worse, next to it, there was what looked like a big factory wrapped up in scaffolding and plastic, and the street was a lane with dead rats and old cars and things like that in it. It wasn't great, but I thought, okay, well, this is what we've got. So I asked people to help me, and then one day the scaffolding came down. It turns out it was a church, not a factory, and it was beautifully clean, and it was rather lovely. And over the years, gradually, bit by bit, what's become known as Lucky Star Lane has really become very lovely. It's become a very, very lovely place to live. But for a long time, we had a situation where one of the neighbours wasn't very happy in the situation, and I didn't really know what to do about it. I actually left for 10 years and went to live somewhere else, and then I came back. And then during the lockdown, I started to make the garden there in that wilderness, and then my neighbour came back, and then she started to make something really interesting in her garden. And then she had hens, and she brought me an egg, and one day she brought me some homemade jam. And then we started talking, and we realised we had a huge amount in common. And yesterday we had a big hug. And I think that's a kind of a miracle, actually. But it's been a beautiful thing to know that. It sounds naive to think all things can be fixed, but, you know, maybe all things can be fixed in the end. Maybe we can find ways. Maybe we could. I think the water always finds the sea. You know, the river always finds the sea is one way of looking at it, but it might take a very meandering route to get there. And then I called the show live from Lucky Star Lane because that's where I was. And it was my brother that called it Lucky Star Lane because it was behind the Chinese restaurant called Lucky Star, and he bought a signpost. I haven't registered the name of the street officially, but I think it sounds great to live at Lucky Star Lane. I have quite a sad story of my connection, one of my connections with nature. It's quite ironic, given that I usually go to Greece every year and stay at Kalikalos, which is surrounded by a vast and beautiful mountainous forest. It's so lush and green, it looks like green fur from a distance, and it pours down to the Aegean, which is sparkly and turquoise. I spend every summer there surrounded by this lush environment. If you want to have a look at it, look at the film Mamma Mia, because that's where it was filmed. Yeah, just as an aside, we've reenacted that many years, and quite often the Meryl Streep part. And my daughter Rose is so like the character, the daughter there. We often talk about that. So there's this beautiful lush greenness there, and then in Scotland as well, all these lovely forests. But you see, outside my house in the north, there is one tree that I just love to look at. It links to why I like to lie in bed in the morning, because I like to lie in bed just looking at this tree. But that tree is dying, and it has caused me a bit of concern. I feel like a relative is dying, and the received wisdom is that it's time to cut it down, because it might fall down in a forest, in a storm. It might cause some damage. So my neighbours and I have talked about it, and we've engaged a couple of tree surgeons to look at it and see what can be saved. And at the end of the day, yes, this tree is likely to be cut, but I keep delaying that cut. I keep hoping the tree might spring back to life. I often take photographs of it throughout the season, so I feel as if I've seen it through winter and spring and summer, and then in the autumn is my favourite time when it's so full of green leaves. And the other thing that's really lovely about it is I see the sunset through that tree at night. So I feel like I really have a relationship with something that's not terribly strong. It feels fragile. So in a way, I'm glad that it's like that, because it's part of a much bigger picture. It's part of a much bigger picture where nature is under threat. Our ecosystems are becoming fragile, and human beings have got a big part in that particular drama at the moment. So I'm very reluctant to cut this tree down, and I keep looking at it and trying to think of other ways that, I'm still on a meander with that particular one.